Okay, good morning, everybody. Good morning, SEMA brothers and sisters. I've got 11 o'clock on my watch, so we'll go ahead and start this now. On behalf of the SEMA Executive Board and the SEMA Professional Development Committee, I would like to welcome you all to the first ever Professional Development Committee's virtual Zoom event series contract roadshow. I am Lawrence Arias. I am a BSA for TSS assigned to Department of Tax and Collections. I am also honored to be your SEMA Executive Board second Vice President and Chair of the SEMA Professional Development Committee. Now, before I introduce everybody, as you all know, the contract was approved by 98% of the SEMA's dues-paying members and has been ratified by the Board of Supervisors and goes into effect this Monday, May 4th. So may the 4th be with all of you. So here's something that we've been doing in our TSS All Hands and seems to work well. If you haven't already done so, please make sure to log in with your full name so that we can respond promptly to your questions if time runs short during the question and answer section of today's roadshow. You can also rename yourself if you want. Now, this is something, please be advised, questions that are submitted by unknown users will not be considered. So. I would also like to mention that the format that we would like to follow for these 4 sessions today and the next 3 Wednesdays is our plan is to discuss the topic that we've assigned for today in the first half of our session and then reserve the latter half for questions. And you can type your questions in chat. So at this point, I think I would like to hand this over to Zeb Feldman and Adam Cole, our business representatives for SEMA.
Sure, thank you. Hi, Zeb Feldman, SEMA OE3 Senior Business Rep. And actually, if I may, Lawrence, I wanted to just do an intro of all the folks that are on the call right now that have served either on the negotiations team or on the e-board.
Yes, thank you very much, Zeb. Please do.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. Also, I wanted to give a reminder to everybody that this will be recorded. So we are recording these. It will be posted to our YouTube account, if not our website or possibly both. So just bear that in mind. Of course, as I think Lawrence mentioned, be respectful in all communications. We haven't had any problems with that with any of our SEMA gatherings, but just please do bear that in mind. So as I mentioned, I introduced myself. I also served on the negotiations team as first chair. And of course, I've been with SEMA for, 8+ years now, Dolores. Is that right?
Yeah, seems like a minute.
For a little while. Do you want to introduce yourself, Dolores?
Yes, Dolores Morales. I'm the president of SEMA. I work for the probation department.
Wonderful. Adam?
This is Adam Cole, SEMA business rep, and I was on the negotiating team.
Donna?
Hello. Donna Mensimer, SEMA executive secretary on the negotiating team, and happy to be here.
Great. And then Robin.
I am Robin Rivas Romano. I'm on the e-board as a member at large. I was on the negotiating team and I work for social services.
And if there's anyone else that we missed, please just flag us and we will get to you. We'll interrupt after we finish the first section rather. Also, you'll see that intermittently we'll be posting in the chat. The reason for that is anyone that joins late can't see previous chat logs. So what I just posted right there is where the contract is available. We're going to be sharing screens as well, but that way you can follow along either on your own document that you're referring to, or you can follow on the shared screen. As Lawrence mentioned, this is the first of 4 events and is in many ways replacing the sort of historic town hall that we would do. So today we're covering Article 2, which encompasses the basic wage, lump sum, differentials, classification studies and realignments, longevity pay, and also we're talking about Article 3, which is retirement. Based on how the time goes, we may also have a little bit of discussion about the budget, but we'll see how many questions are involved and how long the actual process takes. So I see Joanna has joined us. Let's see if I can't locate her and hoist her up. In the meantime, Adam, do you want to start with the format and how each item we're going to go through by introducing the section and reading the language and so on?
Yeah, sure thing. So we're going to be going through not just the sections that have been changed with the recent negotiations, but we're going to be doing a complete review of the contract, including the sections that haven't been changed. The hope is that at the end of this, we'll have this video document that can serve us for the next 4 years, a little more than 4 years for the duration of the contract, with a discussion of every part of the contract, hopefully clarifying sections that have been historically confusing, as well as putting in layperson terms some of the often confusing language that's in the contract. So for each section, we're going to open up with an introduction, just introduce each section, for example, as section 2.1, basic wage, which will allow us to bookmark each section when we upload it to YouTube, for example. We're going to start with just a simple reading of the language in each section. We'll identify anything that's changed between the previous version of SEMA's contract and the current version, as well as briefly address kind of how we came to make those changes. Kind of the how and why was covered more in SEMA's previous explanations of the contract. That won't be the focus of this necessarily. Then we'll explain any of the confusing language that might be in there in layman's terms, identify any terms like FLSA that you might need to know for an understanding of the language. And then we'll get into the meat of it, identify what does this section do for members or for the county if it's language that they wanted in the contract. Explain what the language does into effect, and then put it in context. What else do you need to know about how this language operates? Is there a difference in interpretation between how SEMA has historically interpreted this section and how we would encourage it to be read, as compared to maybe the county has had a different interpretation historically? And then just anything else you need to know to understand the language. And then we'll hit any of the common questions that we frequently get about contract language. There's some sections that are more confusing or that lead to more frequent questions. So we'll try and hit those on the first pass through. And then we will be, as Lawrence said, taking questions from members about each section as well. Please do share any questions that you might have. First off, because we'd absolutely like to answer them. And second, we're going to be using a lot of these questions to help produce what we're going to have as the final version of this contract. Something that we talked about in the previous town halls is that what we're hoping to do with this contract cycle is do a complete rewrite of the contract to just put it in more readable terms. Things get increasingly Byzantine as time goes on, and you have insertions and deletions from a lot of different hands as the years go by, and it can leave things being somewhat unreadable, which we can see now going through the contract. With the need to close the contract out quickly with COVID, there just wasn't an opportunity and time to do that before we wanted to close the contract out. What we're going to be doing instead is the final version for print is going to have non-operative contract language sections in it. So that's going to look like is a little brick of text in a different color that's called SEMA recommends, and it'll have some of those frequent questions addressed, as well as just putting some things in more layman terms for members to understand. So this won't be agreed upon contract language. It'll be the things that we think you should know as you're reading through the contract, helpful reminders, translations, etc. And we're going to use the questions that we're getting here today, as well as from previous town halls we've had, to help make sure that's as comprehensive as possible.
And then I see we're joined by Jesse Castaneda and Joanna Dobrinsky, who can introduce themselves in just a moment. Also, as Adam stated, we will be looking at the items that you post in chat and trying to answer each of your individual or group questions. Please, if you can, do send that to the entire group, so everyone can see your question. That way, not only can our moderators help us group questions if many are about the same topic, but also it's helpful for other people to see the question. If there's some reason that it needs to be private, please shoot it to myself, Adam, or Donna, or Lawrence, and then they'll communicate privately with us if, for whatever reason, your anonymity needs to be maintained. But with the items that we're covering today, I wouldn't anticipate that. But again, you do have that available if that's necessary. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, Joanna?
Yes, good morning. I'm Joanna Dobrinsky, and I'm with Behavioral Health, and I had the honor of being on the negotiation committee.
Thank you so much. And Jesse, I don't know if you're joining it looks like you're joining by phone. I'm going to unmute you if you're available to introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. This is Jesse Castaneda. I'm currently in the emergency room, and I am a member of SEMA's board at large.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jesse. And to everybody, actually, I forgot to mention this, to everybody who's an essential worker, thank you so much. Like, all of us are depending on you, and the residents are depending on you. You may have heard also that there's going to be some additional guidance, in fact, supposedly coming out right now from the public health officer about the shelter in place and some adjustments to that. So just bear that in mind. We'll certainly alert you, as will the county, after that's made fully aware, public. Okay, so do you want to share the screen initially, Adam, or do you want me to? Okay, go ahead then.
Yeah, I'll go ahead, sure.
So we're going to start off with section 2.1, which is the basic wage. We're going to go ahead and read the language as Adam mentioned, and then we're going to discuss any changes and go through the steps that he already mentioned. So do you want to handle the first one here, Adam?
Yeah, sure thing.
Great.
So we're starting today with Article 2, Salaries and Compensation, and the first section we have on here is section 2.1, Basic Wage. So language we have here. Salaries for the term of the agreement for represented classifications are contained in Appendix B, General Wage Increases. Effective May 4th, 2020, the county shall provide a 3% general wage increase for all employees in the bargaining unit, except for those employees in the classifications listed in section 2.6 below, who shall not receive the 3% general wage increase. Effective pay period 2014, June 5th, 2020, the county shall provide a 3% wage increase for all employees in the bargaining unit, except for those employees in classifications listed in section 2.6 below, who shall not receive the 3% general wage increase. Then 3 sections follow with the subsequent 3% general wage increases in their respective period. So this section is fairly straightforward. What this section constitutes is the language guaranteeing the 3% general wage increases that were bargained for each year of the contract. So obviously this is a change from the previous contract that we had. This is our new set of wage increases for this contract. During bargaining, what we saw this cycle is that the Board of Supervisors in the county sought to hold all unions to this 3% general wage increase benchmark. That was the expectation set by the Board of Supervisors. It was what had already been authorized for the budget by the Board of Supervisors prior to entering negotiation season. So what SEMA and other unions have kind of had as a measure for success for this bargaining cycle is what were units able to achieve in addition to this 3% general wage increase. So this was kind of the standard language that pretty much everybody got. And then we're measuring ourselves based on what else we were able to get on top of this. We're continuing to see, even for units that are still in bargaining right now, it looks like the county will be able to maintain this line even with economic uncertainty that's ahead. This has been something that the county's wanted to institute for every unit particularly. So going through some of the more specific language, starting at the top there, we have the salaries for the term of the agreement are contained in Appendix B. So for the last contract that SEMA had, there wasn't an up-to-date salary table. The reason that was for the last contract cycle is that when SEMA came to the end of its previous negotiations, what we had was a summary of changes, which was created for this negotiations as well. But because of some attrition on the county side and some other issues, that summary of changes was never translated into a final document like the one we're looking at here, which is a full new contract. And then once there had been some attrition, my understanding is there were some particular disagreements about how some language was going to get migrated into that final version. And what that meant is that there just never was an official version of the contract that was produced. There was a version that SEMA printed out and distributed to members, but it didn't represent a final agreement with the county on what exactly this should look like. So hosted on the county's website, what we've always seen is just that summary of changes that was produced at the end of negotiations. So that's not going to be happening this time. There will be a final salary table included with the new contract that's printed out. The only confusing piece about this language that I would share is that while the language specifically says for the term of the agreement, that does not mean that when the agreement ends, the county is free to not follow those salaries that are included in the contract. And that could come up theoretically, right? We saw that recently. SEMA was for some brief periods off contract without an extension during this previous negotiation season. When the contract lapses in those scenarios, the terms of the previous contract remain in effect. So the salary table, while it says for the term of the agreement, it does not mean that if the agreement lapses for a period that the county is free to cease paying those wages. Anything you want to add about that section there at the top, Seb?
No, not at the top. I did have, once we get through the actual pay periods, I do have some additional information. Also, some
Sure.
folks are asking now for a PDF version of the a document. You should be able to link it, and it should be able, and Lawrence is addressing it, so I'll leave it to him. Thank you.
So moving down to the general increase section. So it has this carve out here when it refers to section 2.6, folks who are not going to receive the general 3% wage increase. What that refers to is our nurses who are aligned with RNPA. We'll get to that section later on today. It's further down below in 2.6. Most of SEMA's nurses, all of them except for actually the nurses in public health, are aligned with RNPA. What that means is that those nurses do not see the wage increase that SEMA bargains for the rest of its members. Instead, they see the wage increase that RNPA bargains for that period. In this case, like referred to, everyone's receiving 3% this year, all unions. So they'll see the same general wage increase as SEMA. We'll get to later that their alignment language does some other things in addition. So we've had some questions about how this applies to steps in particular. So most of SEMA's members are on step plans, right? Which means that there's 5 salary steps when you come into a position. You most often start at step 1. This 3% wage increase is applied at every level of the step. It does not have any effect on when you're going to be stepping. Your step progression is based off the amount of time that you've been at each step, 6 months for the first step, year for the subsequent step, for example. And this 3% is simply layered on top of that at every single step going all the way up the ladder, including for step 6 if you're a nurse. The only exception to this is going to be someone who's had to have their salary redlined because of a reclassification, for example, that moved you into a different classification with a lower salary. The county here calls that Y rating. So for anyone who's been Y rated, for example, through the ITCC process or through some other reclassification or other practice, what that means is that for the first 2 years after which you've been Y rated, you will continue to enjoy the wage increases that you normally would have if you were in your previous classification. However, once that 2-year period ends, you're going to then stop seeing wage increases until the wage listed, for example, in Appendix B in the back here, catches up to wherever you are. So for example, if you were a senior healthcare program manager and for some reason you ended up as a program manager 2 through a reclass process and you had a lower wage, for the first 2 years after you make that move, you'll continue to see every wage increase that you would have if you were a senior healthcare program manager. And then at the end of those 2 years, if you're frozen and you're making $5 over what a program manager 2 makes, you're not going to see any more wage increases until the program manager 2 series has caught up those $5, which would take presumably another couple of years worth of wage increases. Everyone else will see this wage increase. But let's define that. So who's going to see this wage increase, right? So we have some various groups here. We have provisional employees. There are extra help employees that look like they're in SEMA codes. There's folks in our regular coded positions. So SEMA's contract covers folks who are provisional and it covers folks who are in coded positions. As an administrative convenience for the county, they have previously also extended the same wage increases that SEMA's gotten, for example, to groups that we don't represent, like extra help. We have no power to mandate that the county continues to do that. And they may continue to choose to do that as an administrative convenience, or they may not. Obviously, we're we're in tight times with the budget right now. So it's definitely a possibility that they will do something different, as they will with possibly with other groups that normally align with SEMA. The groups that would be in that group would be our ACE folks, folks that are confidential, folks that are unrepresented, have just generally gotten what SEMA's gotten that may or may not continue into the future. But this contract that we've bargained, this covers everybody in a SEMA position, which means folks that are both provisional and folks that are in coded positions. Anything you'd like to add on to that, Zeb?
Yes, so you just covered the red line, or so-called Y-rated, thank you. I also want to talk about that the 3% increase, that triggers every summer, as Adam mentioned, in pay period 14. This does not conflict with your step increases. Several people, probably half dozen, seem to have expressed some confusion about that. So I want to make that clear. You still continue to step on your anniversary date, assuming you have steps to move to. Let's say you're step 3. You step to step 4, that's a 5% wage increase, at that time. Additionally, you get the 3% in pay period 14 of any year of this contract, so that they don't conflict with each other. Also, I wanted to just point out that provisional and unclassified positions all benefit from this as well. This is a change to the salary itself for those positions. It's not an individual that gets the 3% wage increase. Every position and its salary, hourly wage, moves up. And then also I wanted to say that I mentioned the no interference with anniversary date. And there was a question I saw. How do we want to handle the questions, Donna? Do we want to take those at the end, or do we want to cover them now, Donna and Lawrence?
I'd say if you're able to address now, go ahead. But otherwise, I'd really like to just keep it flowing so that make sure that we can get through the material.
Great. We'll come back to anything we missed then. Okay.
Sounds good.
So I saw a question come in about voluntary reduced work hours. That does not impact the percent of wage you get. Of course, VRWH, voluntary reduced work hours, that's where you work anywhere from up to 20% less than your normal work hour. And you lose that amount of pay. Pretend you work 20% less, you take home 20% less. So you still get the full 5% wage increase. You would just lose proportionally however much less of your day you're working. So hopefully that's clear.
The other group that represents a small number of folks that we have here are the people that aren't on steps. So we have 2 groups of people in SEMA. We have those that are on steps. It's the vast majority. And then we have some small number of people that are referred to as broad range. Other places I've worked that has a different name or a different title, deep class, for example. What that group is a group that they don't enjoy the 5% step increases for the 5 steps, but instead they have an evaluation and they can have an additional increase based on performance as determined by their manager. So what this wage increase here means is that broad range folks are guaranteed a minimum of at least a 3% increase on time. However, they can get above and beyond that based on performance. So this is basically a guaranteed minimum floor for our folks that are on broad range. And they may or may not receive some additional increase on top of that.
That's correct. I didn't have anything more to add to this section. If the negotiations team or e-board had anything more or any questions we missed came in, please alert us. Okay, hearing none, let's go ahead and move on to the next section, which is section 2.2, which is evening and night shift for certain nurse classifications and computer shift operations supervisor. This is actually an old title for this section, as you'll see. We'll just go ahead and read through it. The following classifications, when assigned to work evening shifts on a regular ongoing basis, shall receive an additional $320 biweekly. Evening shift shall be defined as any scheduled shift of at least 8 hours beginning on or after 2 p.m. and ending on or before 2 a.m. This one specifically calls out 2 classifications, the admin nurse 2 and the so-called PERC or utilization review coordinator. And the following classifications, when assigned to work night shifts on a regular ongoing basis, shall receive an additional $580 biweekly. And night shift is defined slightly differently as 10 p.m. to 10 a.m. And it's the same 2. Effective May 4th, the following classifications, when assigned and approved by an executive manager to work evening shifts on a regular ongoing basis, shall receive an additional $250 biweekly. Evening shift shall be defined as any scheduled shift of at least 8 hours beginning on or after 2 p.m. and ending on or before 2 a.m. So it's the same requirements there, and you'll see that there are more classifications listed. This list has expanded over the years. And then you'll see down at the bottom here, this is kind of the interesting language. During the term of this agreement, the county may authorize additional classifications to be included in this section, which may be assigned to an evening shift. If such an assignment is made, the evening shift differential shall be $250 paid biweekly. Should an FLSA non-exempt SEMA represented classification be added to this section, the evening shift differential shall be $3.12 per hour. The evening shift differential shall be paid for each hour worked. So I'm going to pause and just talk about that for a minute. So what this means is, if you're working an evening shift, which has just been defined, right? Hang on, let me look at my definition here. Between 10 p.m. and 10 a.m., that there's at least 8 hours, that you get compensation for that. That means that it's your regular shift. It's not one time for some reason you work that shift, right? Or you off shifted for that day or something. It's that this is consistently assigned to you. So you do get compensation for that. And this now has a little more flexibility than prior language, where you can be assigned and say mid-contract cycle, and it wouldn't involve a whole renegotiation of whether or not that classification was relevant. So I know we might have some people from SSA listening in. I know that the rake and former rake and so on, different after hours and needs involved different after hours people being assigned. So this would allow us to do that in a more nimble way. Similarly, for those from probation who know that the ranch had these rotating hours and so forth, they would give us more flexibility in items like that as well. Okay. Effective May 4th, the following classifications, when assigned and approved by an executive manager to work night shifts on a regular ongoing basis, shall receive an additional $300. You'll notice that that's a higher number. It's just a higher number because it's more disruptive to your life, right, to work those shifts. And night shift is defined as at least 8 hours beginning on or after 10 p.m. to 10 a.m. Oftentimes what we can think about as grave shift. And again, there are certain classifications called out there, but there will be more to come, I'm sure. Same language. During the term of this agreement, the county may authorize additional classifications. If such an assignment is made, the evening shift differential shall be $300 paid biweekly. And again, we're calling out the FLSA non-exempt SEMA represented classifications. Read that as hourly. That's the complex way of saying hourly staff get this for each hour of the differential, right? As opposed to paid in that biweekly statement that we mentioned earlier. So with this section, as I mentioned previously, if you look at the old contract, it specified a particular number in brackets by each classification. So it might say janitor supervisor parenthetical 2. So that meant if we ever had more than 2 janitor supervisors that needed to work an evening, we would have to enter a new negotiation with the county and go back and forth, sign a new document, and allocate that. Here, we're not doing that anymore. It is, these classifications are pre-authorized to work these different shifts. And if new classifications emerge, we then define them. SSPM2, facilities manager, whatever it might be. And then there's not a determined number. That's left up to the departments to determine, so that they can flex when and if there's more need to add different staff to that.
Yeah, so sorry,
go ahead.
So this was a section that saw a couple enhancements that Zeb's identifying there through negotiations. So the amounts there saw some increase, as well as particularly removing those caps was an ongoing issue. And Zeb's right to identify the janitor supervisor position. That's one where we've just had more folks who've needed to work that and then not been able to enjoy that benefit because they were capped at two employees who were able to receive this. So this was an important change for us. This language here, though, that identifies as the county may authorize additional classifications to be included. So the way SEMA has read this section historically, and the past practice that we have on this, is that we identify these lists as classifications that are able to be assigned this work. So in order to be able to be assigned this work, you need to be included on one of these lists and therefore be able to receive this differential amount, right? So what that means is that when these hours are rolled out in new areas, what we need to do is continue to ensure that, please alert myself, Zeb, Rebecca, alert your SEMA business rep. There's a desire to change my hours to include this, and then we'll need to get you on this list prior to you accepting those new hours. We need to maintain this being a list of classifications that are able to be assigned these hours, not just classifications who receive this from amongst the group that do this work. That makes sense. Those two things need to remain one and the same. So for any individuals, and this is going to come up both with this section and with some later differentials that we're looking at as well. If there's anyone who has historically been left out of this that we now need to capture with the new language, please reach out and let us know now. We've kind of decided internally we're going to give a 2-week notice to the county. Please ensure that we can get these folks either 24-hour pay, night shift, etc., as these folks are already doing this work right now. So yeah, just to reiterate, this normally follows a meet and confer process when someone's hours are being changed. If a department's trying to change your hours without going through that process, or it's just kind of slid into that being a reality, you need to please reach out and notify SEMA so that we can step in and ensure you're being appropriately compensated. That also ensures that this language remains strong for other SEMA members. We don't want to allow ourselves to slip into an area where this is differently applied in different areas, because that makes the language weaker for everybody else in SEMA as well. So this is a section that requires some diligence to maintain.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Thank you. Thank you, Adam. And I believe we're at the end of this section, so I can talk generally about it. Did I follow the ball correctly?
Yep.
Okay. So Adam mentioned beautifully what you need to do if you currently are working this, or coming down the pike, your department is going to be having these after hours. Alert us. You can alert us. We'll give you the email address that you can alert us individually as business reps, or the generic one for SEMA. Also, I wanted to mention that there is no built-in limit to the number of classifications that can be eligible for this. So this is based on what the business demands. So it's not like, oh, you can only have up to 12, or you can only have, the list right now has 6 or 7 on it. Oh, you can never exceed 10 classifications listed. It's what the business demands. Then also there were some questions that came through. I see one, a very lengthy question about the lump sum. We will cover that under the lump sum. I believe Ryan mentioned that. We'll cover that when we get to the lump sum section. Also, there was a question about the draft version versus final version of the contract. The version that is on the website was uploaded at a time that it was a draft. It hadn't gone through final ratification. Last Tuesday, April 21st, the Board of Supervisors ratified for the second reading. So that means fully ratified. It's now in effect. The SEMA contract in a 5-0 vote, as they do with things that are placed on consent. And so our contract is now final and in effect. So there's no opportunity for the county to, or us for that matter, to renegotiate particular portions of it. So I wanted to hopefully address that question as well. Mm-hmm. Oh, then one other question, are differentials purgeable? I didn't hear you cover that.
Yeah.
Do you want to cover that, Adam, or do you want me to?
Yeah, sure thing. So whether or not a differential or some extra compensation that a member is receiving is purgeable, what that means is, are you paying pension contributions on that additional income? Whether or not something is purgeable is not subject to the contract. It's not something that's generally bargainable. It's a definition and something that's determined between CalPERS and between the county, and they have an internal set of definitions on what income is purgeable and what's not. So we're not going to be hitting for each differential and amount whether or not it is, but rather give you some explanation of how you can identify whether a particular premium pay that you're receiving is being counted in your PERSable income. And those things will shift and change over time as we add new language and as language changes. So what you're going to want to do to identify whether you're paying PERS contributions is, we'll get to the retirement section later today, but you're going to want to identify what's the contribution rate that you're currently paying on your salary, and then identify, you know, based on that percentage, I'm making $100,000 and I'm paying, you know, $16,000 a year, or break it up by pay period on my PERS contribution. If you can identify that you're paying the entirety of your contribution rate there on all of the income that you're receiving, including the premium pay, you're paying PERS contributions on it. If you're missing it, that premium pay that you're going to be receiving is not going to be PERSable. I've seen, for example, evening and night shift differentials be treated as PERSable and non-PERSable differently at different employers, and unfortunately, it's just kind of a difficult situation that different employers find themselves in with PERS, that they might have practices that aren't standard throughout everyone that's participating in that pension plan. And it's up to PERS to try to, you know, review language and ensure that everyone's meeting their definition. But additionally, for any particular premium pay, payroll can also assist and let you know whether that premium pay is being treated as PERSable or not.
And it's bottom line that everybody should always remember, and I say this whenever anyone asks me for PERS advice, CalPERS is the final arbiter of whether something is PERSable or not, what your percentage is, what your, you may have done a calculation, call them. They're very helpful. Just hop on the website, CalPERS, and talk to someone live would be my recommendation. They're easy to contact, as I mentioned, they're helpful, and they're the arbiter of that. The only time that we would get involved is if, for example, they very clearly have miscalculated something. We've negotiated that if you're a classic employee, you get 2.5% per year. You know, you work 10 years. And if they say, well, you only get 5%, they're inaccurate, right? They're just simply inaccurate. And we would help on that, as we have on a few cases in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, do you want to handle the next few differentials and the nurse longevity, and I'll jump in on the class studies?
Yeah, sure thing. So we're looking at section 2.3 now, pest advisory differential. A park field support manager who obtains and maintains a valid agricultural pest control advisor license issued by the state of California and is assigned to perform pest control advisory functions shall be compensated at a range approximately 7.5% higher than that specified for regular positions in this classification. The differential shall be limited to one position in parks. So this section is fairly straightforward, affects obviously a very small percentage of SEMA, and it's premium pay for holding this specific certification. The county has different practices sometimes and how things like this are addressed. We see, for example, in some areas that if you have a higher certification, for example, road operations superintendent is a good example here. Sometimes the county will create a separate code that requires you have this particular certification. But in other instances, like we can see here, it's addressed through the contract rather than being a separate and distinct classification. So otherwise, a fairly straightforward differential applies to one member that we have in parks. Section 2.4 is our bilingual differential. SEMA represented employees who meet the requirements set forth in Section 52, Special Compensation F, Language Translations, Differential of the Salary Ordinance, shall continue to be eligible for bilingual pay. Effective May 4th, 2020, such bilingual pay shall be $200 per month. So this is a section that saw an enhancement through the negotiations that we just had with an increase to $200 per month. This is a section that we get questions fairly frequently about. The first one I would say is that you need to be required to be using your bilingual skills in some capacity with some kind of regularity in order to qualify for this differential. It's not solely a differential for folks who happen to be bilingual, but there needs to be some need. There's not an exact and specific definition as to what that expectation is of how frequently you're using this. I would just say, for example, if once per year you're asked or you need to use your bilingual language for some reason, that's definitely not going to qualify you. Likewise, you're also not obligated in those situations to use your bilingual language, as you're not being compensated for it. In that circumstance, it'll be up to the individual. We would have, of course, encouraged you to pitch in there if you can be of assistance, but you're not obligated to if you're not receiving the differential. You can choose to or to not as you see fit. For those folks who are using their language on a regular basis, you'll follow the county has a testing process to ensure proficiency, that you are in fact bilingual, and that you are in fact using this. Whether or not your language is needed is a determination that's going to be made by your manager. Where SEMA is happy to get involved and help is if your manager is being unreasonable on what they're defining as regular or frequent usage. If you say that, hey, I have to use my language at least weekly, and my manager's saying that it's not required for my job, that's the kind of circumstance where we're happy to get in and assist and apply some pressure to ensure that you're treated fairly and that you are able to be compensated with bilingual pay. So section 52 is further down in the contract, but it's also pointing over to there's a specific section in the salary ordinance that this is referencing as well, which could be subject to change. So sometimes you find sections in the contract that point to external documents, and the contract doesn't do a snapshot or doesn't freeze whatever that language looks like when we sign the contract. Those external documents themselves are subject to change, which could theoretically change the requirements for the testing company that the county uses, for example, to administer a bilingual test. So it's pointing to both the salary ordinance as well as further down in the SEMA contracts. If we have anything else here. Okay, anything else you would add to the bilingual section, Zeb, or anybody on the board? No? Okay, so section 2.5, we have nurse longevity pay. Incumbents in these nursing-related classifications and any new or successor classifications as determined by ESA/HR that are related to a nursing classification and allocated to SEMA shall be eligible for a salary step 6 after accumulation of 36 months of competent service at the 5th step of the current classification. Incumbents in these nursing-related classifications shall be eligible for compensation at a rate 5% higher than step 5. And then we have a list of classifications. B, incumbents in these nursing-related classifications shall be eligible for an additional 5% pay above the established maximum in the broad range after accumulation of 36 months of competent service at the top step of the salary range in the current classification. So we're going to hit section 2.6, nurse realignments here as well. I'll read the language right now as it's very similar, and then we'll tackle both of these. The following classifications and any new or successor classifications as determined by ESA/HR that are related to a nursing classification and allocated to SEMA during the term of this agreement shall be aligned with the appropriate classes in RNPA. There follows a long list. Okay, so there's two sections here, section 2.6 and 2.5. Both of these capture what we would refer to as the Me Too language that we have with RNPA. So to clarify, there's some confusing language here in a couple places that we've tried to change but haven't been able to. So we'll identify that and go into what did change. Particularly confusing piece here is what does it mean that you have 36 months of competent service at the 5th step of the current classification? So 36 months of service is straightforward. 36 months of competent service is not necessarily clear. We tried to remove this and pointed out to the county we've never had an individual who didn't step appropriately because the county identified incompetent service. And how would we be identifying that regardless? So it wasn't something that we were able to change, but that's never been in effect before. It's never been used. So likely not worth paying attention to, and hopefully something that we can clarify and take out for the future. Secondarily, we have this section that says incumbents in these nursing-related classifications and any new or successor classifications as determined by ESA HR. So this is the new language that we got in here. What we wanted to do was ensure that every time a new classification was added or the title of a classification was changed, similar as with the night shift and evening shift differentials, that didn't trigger a need to meet and confer with the county and try and push to get something new included in the contract, lest SEMA folks miss out. So what this will do is include, when we go through a class study, and the most recent time this happened, for example, we had a trauma program coordinator classification that got a title change and is part of this list. And then our nurse case managers at VMC had a title change and we're split into 2 new classifications. We wanted to ensure that in situations like that, we're capturing those folks in this list. So unfortunately, what that means is this list is no longer exhaustive and it's not even necessarily reflective. We want to maintain it in the contract so that we're not removing something and it could possibly be interpreted that folks aren't going to be covered. But what it means is that this list is no longer going to be exhaustive. For those new classifications coming in, you will be included in here if you are a nursing related classification. This section in here, as determined by ESA HR, what that refers to is not that ESA or HR have jurisdiction to decide whether or not a nursing related classification should be included in this language, but rather to determine that a classification is nursing related. So that's where the decision-making point is. That's where they're using their jurisdiction and their expertise. It's not that they're just able to not include folks in here that are nursing related as they see fit. And the reason that it's nursing related there is that we specifically didn't want to include classifications that require a nursing degree, because we have some classifications that are nursing degree recommended, for example, or that's one of the possible criteria that can qualify you for the job, but you could also, for example, be a physical therapist. So we have classifications like that included on here. We wanted to be able to continue to ensure that folks where we have a large number of nurses in the position, but it's not necessarily required, can still be appropriately aligned with RNPA. So that's some clarification on the language in particular. How this works in effect is that it does 2 things. It, 1, guarantees that nurses see the same wage increase as RNPA, but it also captures any unit-wide realignments that RNPA receives for this group as well. So prior to negotiations, with this language, I would say it's not evident whether those realignments should necessarily be captured, and this language hadn't been used previously to assert that those realignments should be captured. However, with the most recent contract that RNPA received, there was a 4% and 1% realignment. We were able to ensure that those realignments were applied to folks in these classifications. So what that means now is we have this established past practice that this language does guarantee those realignments for our folks in these nursing classifications. So there's not going to be too much desire moving forward to tinker with the language, because it's functioning well now in that it captures a significant amount of benefit for our nurses. And additionally, we have this evergreen language now that ensures that new nursing classifications that are created in SEMA are also going to be receiving this benefit. The piece that we weren't able to change in these negotiations that we were looking to was to change the timing for when these raises are given. So that was something of a priority. Oh man, there's a bird onto it. So there is an issue currently that RNPA normally gets their increases 3 or 4 months after SEMA receives its increases. So that's end of September, beginning of October. Usually, I believe it's going to be the beginning of October for this contract cycle, whereas the rest of SEMA sees its increases in June. Something we tried to do was get that timing moved up to June, regardless of the fact that it was a realignment with RNPA that was guaranteeing that increase. That's not something we were able to get. And part of the reason for that is that during this contract cycle, our nurses saw their first increase back in February while we were still bargaining for the rest of SEMA. So having the timing tied to RNPA has been both a benefit and it's going to be a hindrance in this bargaining cycle. That's something we'll definitely continue to look at for future negotiations, but at least for this cycle, that being tied to RNPA with the timing was both a benefit and detriment. The other piece here is this section, as far as the timing with RNPA, that does not apply to the pension reductions that we're going to be looking at shortly. So just to hit that now, our RNPA aligned nurses see their wage increases in time with RNPA, but you'll see your SEMA pension reductions in time with the rest of SEMA, which is that pay period 14 June marker. Okay. Let me take a look at the questions, see if we had anything that came up. Yeah, so for the last year, so RNPA of course signed a 4-year contract, whereas SEMA signed a 5-year contract. So right now there's a question mark for that final year. Presumably that's going to be at least a 3% wage increase. It's most frequent that a better than average wage increase comes in the first year of the contract. That's usually a priority unions have. But yeah, that is currently a question mark what that raise will be there. RMPA will have some time to negotiate before that goes into effect. So hopefully our folks see it on time, but that's going to be somewhat up to RMPA. And that's the benefits and detriments to having this tie with RMPA. Lee, that you pointed there, is that it does have this question mark now for year 5. The upside to having the tie, of course, is that our nurses are going to have a great contract. They're seeing both that significant realignment from RMPA as well as the significant pension reduction that SEMA was able to bargain. So on the whole, absolutely a massive benefit, but we'll need to wait and see what RMPA is able to negotiate for 2023.
Okay, great. I did want to just report, I'll post it in a moment when Adam's talking, that I updated the web page and we now have the final contract that was ratified for 2120 updated. So if you just go to the website, you can download that there as well.
Yeah. So no, Lee, SEMA nurses will receive an increase, assuming our RNPA receives an increase. If RNPA doesn't, that's something we'll have to address, but that would be unforeseen in the history of nursing unions in California, I would say. But it means that it's possible it could come late, and we won't know what that number is until RNPA signs their contract. If for some reason RNPA was unable to capture an increase, that is definitely something that we would address for our nurses there. And RNPA will get a raise in coming up in October. The one that they saw in February earlier this year was because they, like we did, signed their contract after expiration. So that was the 2019 raise folks saw in February, and they'll see their 2020 raise in October. Okay.
Okay, so we're on to the class study process. I did want to answer, someone privately sent me a message, but it is important to many. I think I want to re-emphasize this clarification. The step increase is not inclusive of the 3% general wage increase. So pretend in 30 days, you're supposed to get your 5% step increase. You get that. You also get your 3% general wage increase that SEMA negotiated on your behalf. So you get both. And there's a compounding effect, so I'm not going to get into the math on that, but it's a more than 8% increase. Okay, hopefully that clarifies that again. Okay, so this classification study portion was extremely important to us. While we wanted certainly more classifications than what we have here, as you'll see, we have 30. For those of you that have experienced lengthy class study timelines, you'll appreciate having a less than a year mandatory response time is a huge win for SEMA. So I'll go ahead and look at the language. With the exception year of calendar year 2020, workers may request a classification study during the month of March or such time as designated by the Director of Personnel, but in any event, no less than 1 month per calendar year. Requests shall be submitted to ESA Human Resources on the authorized online request form. Right now, you can submit, well, prior to April 21st, you could submit at any time for a classification study. This changes that. You can now submit in the month of March. And I'll get into this. There are 2 types of class studies for the most part. There's employee initiated, which this talks to, and executive initiated, which can still happen at any time. A committee made up of representatives from ESA, HR, and the union will meet annually 1 month after the close of this window to determine which submitted requests will be accepted. So that window pops along, rolls along in March. After that, we meet to discuss the various classifications and submittals that were made. And you all, I mean, not you all, but a representative selection of SEMA membership will be able to participate in those committees. Will be accepted for study, which requests will be placed in a deferred status, and which requests will be denied. The committee will base their consideration on a number of factors, which may include classification levels, compaction, recruitment or retention difficulties, fiscal impact, and new responsibilities assigned but not covered in existing job specifications. The committee will finalize the list and the scope of each study, i.e. a full classification study, job specification review, revision, salary review, etc., within 3 months after the first meeting. The maximum number of requests accepted by the committee for study shall be capped at 30 per year, but upon completion of the accepted studies, ESA-HR may continue to work studies in the deferred status. Requests in the deferred status not initiated for study by ESA before the next window may be considered by the committee without requiring a new request. However, an updated PCQ and job application may be requested. So I know I'm kind of deviating from the process we talked about here a little bit, but I want to talk about this. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at compaction, which is important in years past. We're looking at, I'm going to read that again, the responsibilities assigned but not covered on an existing job specification. So for those of you who have ever gone through a job spec revision with me before, or you've sat in with me, I often will do this, is I'll say, here, this piece of paper here, this is your job description. This is what you're supposed to be doing. This is what you're actually doing. In a perfect world, right, they match. Usually what happens is they end up something like this. And when your job gets to be like this or this, that's when you're really in the wrong classification and we need to have a look at it, either to revise the spec studies. More often than not, it involves you moving to a different classification itself. Okay. If the classification is incomplete, ESA-HR will notify the worker to complete the request along with a due date for completing the request. So this is, if you accidentally don't fill out your form, you're going to get a notification. You won't just be auto-denied. ESA-HR will notify workers of the status of their request, accepted, deferred, denied, and the scope where appropriate. We talked about the scope earlier. Is it a full-blown class study where they look at the entirety of the class, salary, what your job duties are, maybe your colleagues' job duties, other people who inhabit that code, or is it much more limited in scope? We believe this classification is underpaid compared to peers or the market. And that's a salary survey, which is much narrower in scope than a full-blown class study. Workers who are under study shall not be permitted to submit a request. Workers whose classification study was denied shall not be permitted to request another classification study until one additional window has passed. So this is avoiding repeat requests. If the study is denied, the worker may appeal to the Director of Personnel. The appeal, could you scroll down a little bit, Adam?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. The appeal shall be submitted in writing within 10 working days of the receipt of the denial. The Director of Personnel shall determine the procedure of the appeal. The Director shall provide the union with a list of appeal decisions. Historically, we've represented folks in these appeals and we've advocated for you. Of course, we would continue to do that in the future. So if it gets to that level, we'll will go with, assuming you're a member, will go with you and help with that presentation to the personnel director. If ESA HR determines some assigned duties fall outside of the worker's classification, ESA HR will notify the appointing authority to remove such duties within 10 working days of that determination. Any duties performed at a higher level while receiving work at a class pay will not be considered. This is a key point. If someone's retired or for some reason you're temporarily taking on duties and you're being compensated for those duties, formerly it was called TARD, now it's revised to work at a class, and work at a class pay, that's just not considered for this, right? Because you're taking on, you are literally working out of class and you're being compensated to work out of class. So you can't work out of class for 6 months and then say, make me a new code because I worked out of class. That's being accounted for. So that's the clarifying point there. If a study is accepted or approved on appeal, the completed study shall be posted to the union no later than 12 months after the date of acceptance or favorable appeal determination, unless otherwise agreed for both parties. So that gives a little bit more time for the county to complete the appealed cases. If it is recommended that the worker be reclassified, all merit system rules shall apply to regular classification studies, such as test requirements, meeting the employment standards, serving a new probationary period, et cetera, shall apply. So, for example, if it became apparent that you were doing work of some kind of a developer that required a particular certification, but you didn't have that certification, this is saying that you would have to get that certification in order to meet the employment standards. Occasionally in years past, we've negotiated exceptions to that. So this is important language. As I mentioned, the biggest takeaway from this is that there's now a time frame that requires the county to respond within a set amount of time. Many of you may have experienced class studies, as I mentioned, going 2 or 3 years. The turnover rate, which I don't have a precise number, we anecdotally believe it's between 4 and 6 years for a classification that somebody turns over 4 or 6 years, every 4 or 6 years, promotion, transfer, something of that nature, that would involve a significant change in duties. So imagine if your class study is taking 2 to 3 years, very likely you will have left that classification by the time your study comes down. So this puts some guardrails on it, makes a turnaround within that year. It establishes a better process where we have clearer expectations for us and for you. And it, as I said, that turnaround time is just so key for us. Also, in terms of what classifications will we be considering, you can see that we have 30, up to 30 a year. We can do more, but only 30 will be processed for that year, guaranteed. So with that 30, we're going to be looking at things right now. We already have 4 folks who have 4 classifications that have submitted. We're going to be looking at a lot of things, especially in the initial years of this contract language. Historical applications, areas where there are historical problems, individuals that perhaps have correctly pointed out that other classifications received a realignment and they did not, which is always a challenge and quandary with realignments. And so we're going to be looking at those historical cases. We're going to be weighting those heavily in the first few years and working with whoever our SEMA team is to examine all of those codes. There's also going to be a factor of we're looking for some bang for our buck. So what do I mean by that? If pretend we examine what I'll call a workhorse code, an accountant 3, a senior accountant, a management analyst. These are classifications that have 40 to 80 people in it throughout SEMA. We're going to look at those. We're certainly not going to exclude 1, 2, 3 of codes, but we're going to look at those and we're going to bias a little bit towards classifications that impact many more people as opposed to a one of classification. In fact, in earlier iterations of the language, we had a specific call out that 10 of the studies would be devoted to 1 of, 2, or 3 of classifications. The county just increased the total number to 30 rather than give us a separate carve out. So we will be paying attention to that, but as I mentioned, we are going to be looking at those deeper reaching classifications and giving some favorability to those. Who will be on the committee? That is open. We're going to be discussing with the e-board who wants to serve from the e-board. Of course, business reps will be assigned, and we also want to get representative folks from the the unit itself. At this point, and this is just me talking, this is not anything that's been approved. At this stage, I would think we'd want to look at who applies for those positions. And then that way, so if we have, for example, 50 people putting in for 30 slots, or 50 classifications putting in for 30 slots, and 20 of them are in healthcare, well, we probably better have some people with some healthcare expertise that are on that committee. If none of them are in healthcare for some very bizarro reason, then we probably wouldn't need to do that. Same thing with administrative work, same thing with accounting work, right? If we see there's a disproportionate number leaning towards any way, we certainly want to have that kind of representation on the committee. So I'm excited about this language. I think it's going to be a new dawn for at least business reps in ways of having some teeth to force the county along. These are grievable if they don't meet the timelines. So I'm certainly happy with this language. I hope you all are as well. Is there anything that the team wanted to add that perhaps I forgot to cover, or any questions that came in while I was talking?
Yeah, a few things. Historically, over the last few years, at least since I've been here especially, I would say we see maybe on average about one of these class studies get completed every month. That's gone up as folks have been on quarantine and able to kind of do this work more frequently. We've been seeing maybe 2. But some of those, of course, are the smaller ones where it's just a job spec revision as opposed to a complete class study. So while we previously had an ability to submit an unlimited number of these, the fact is that we were just on an upward trajectory for how many of these were pending, and they weren't being cleared out any quicker than they had previously, even with an expanding ESA staff. And even after ITCC ended and the hospital acquisition was concluded, we were expecting things to start moving quicker, and they just weren't, frankly. So we see getting 30 of these per year as a significant improvement from where we have been. A couple other things that we're going to be having the committee look at when they're finding priorities. We want to be using this tool to prioritize studies that likely aren't going to be getting attention otherwise. So like Zeb mentioned, there's still going to be an ability for executives to push through class studies that they're looking for. And therefore, for things that are going to be getting pushed regardless, we don't need to use one of these 30 to push that class study along. I would say, for example, an area we're expecting to see some class studies get pushed through at VMC, the executive team's talking about they're going to need to take a second look at what classifications have taken on a significant amount of enterprise-wide duty that they weren't expecting to at the beginning of the hospital acquisition, but that now needs some adjustment. Paul wants to do that, and he's going to do it regardless of whether or not SEMA pushes for it, because that's what that leadership team thinks they need to do to appropriately align their classifications with the new org chart and the work that's fallen out there. So those are going to move forward on their own. That was a benefit that Zeb, myself, and the team were identifying, that this 30 is going to set a floor for us, and if we use it correctly, we should be able to capture above and beyond this 30, because executives will have their own priorities that they have pushed historically and that they will continue to push. The other piece that we're going to have sorry, Zeb, did you want to comment on that piece right there?
Yeah, so no, there's a question that I want to address. Go ahead, finish out and I'll address it.
The other piece that we're going to be asking the committee to focus on, and it's going to require some training, and this will pay off in 2 ways, is that we're going to have the team make some level of evaluation about, is this a class study that has a likely chance for success? And there's a few things that Zeb and myself do when we're pushing class studies through this process and trying to capture what we're looking for members, whether it's a greater or some increase that ESA didn't initially recommend. And what we're doing there is we're comparing the classification to other similar classifications at nearby counties or in the private sector. We're looking if there's a misalignment within the org chart. We're trying to see if internally this classification is being inappropriately used from how it's compared with other departments, for example. Those are the kind of things that are going to be persuasive to ESA in this process. And we want to be pushing through class studies that have a reasonably likely chance of success. So the folks in the committee are going to require some kind of just general training on how ESA is persuadable on these, what are the criteria they're looking for. We're secondarily hoping that we can get a broader knowledge base of how SEMA goes about advocating for these positions, just in the possibility that Zeb or myself aren't here in the future. We don't want the knowledge of how we've been so effective at pushing these through in the past to disappear. So having a broader base of SEMA folks that are familiar with this, they know what to look for, they know how to push these cases, will be of long-term benefit for the unit.
And two excellent points that were raised. The first being, how does this impact classification studies that have already been submitted? So I'm happy to report that all class studies that have previously been submitted have been assigned. So what that means is that the step is submit it to ESA, it sits in somebody's drawer for a year or more, then someone pulls it out of the drawer and starts actually working on it. So by assigned, it means someone's already pulled it out of the drawer and is now looking at it and researching it. Typically, it takes a year to close those out. So that's the soft commitment we've received from the county, is anything that has been submitted prior to now will be closed out within a calendar year. So that's a soft commitment. It's not a contractually enforceable commitment, but that's something that we've been led to expect. Certainly, our language requiring a response within the same year, if they exceeded a year, that would be ridiculous. And I'd try to use our language to leverage that. The other sorry, go ahead.
And just to reiterate, so what that means is if you have a currently pending class study, it's going to continue to move forward. It's not going to be forgotten about. It will continue to move forward. We're seeing an uptick, particularly because of the quarantine, of how much work ESA is putting in on these. So those should be closed out within the year. Regardless, there's a commitment that all pending class studies will be closed out. And we'll expect to see them closed out very soon, because there's going to be a new batch of these coming in that have to be done within the year fairly shortly. So yes, if you have a pending classification study, it will continue to be addressed.
And another excellent point that was raised, I mentioned it briefly when I talked about the so-called bang for our buck. The question was, if 4 individuals in a particular classification apply and we choose those 4 for study, does that count as 4 requests towards the 30 or 1? It counts as 1. So in my earlier example, if we picked something like a management analyst, for instance, where there's, I'm just guessing, 80 of them throughout the county, then that counts as 1 of the 30, right? That does not necessarily mean that the class study results would be identical for all 80 of those individuals. If, for example, and I know we're getting deep into the weeds here, but that's the point of this type of very granular examination of the contract, right? For example, if the review committee looked at management analysts and we found that the 20 management analysts assigned to SSA are all doing ledge work, contract work, and dealing with multiple outside agencies, as an example. We've identified that those 20 in SSA have done that. That doesn't mean that every management analyst everywhere does that. So those 20 might be moved up to a senior, or they might be moved into a different classification or whatnot. However, all 80 are eligible for study as identification of that one classification management analyst. So I want to also draw that nuance. It counts as, so to answer the question directly, it counts as 1, no matter how many people are in that classification.
Yeah, and this
go ahead.
And this kind of is an important definition to understand how ESA refers to what is a class study. For example, ITCC, that huge process, is referred to by ESA as a single class study. Practically speaking, we're not going to be able to get the county to do something again like ITCC and call it one classification study. It would be unreasonable on our part, and that's just not going to go anywhere. But that, for example, was considered a single class study. But yes, we could theoretically probably get half of SEMA a class study in a year if we identified our 30 largest classifications, the ones that really have a ton of people in them. Program manager series, management analyst series, right? That's not going to be the priority set that we're coming in with. But that kind of speaks to that bang for the buck Zeb's talking about. There will be a benefit to getting large classifications studied. Just to hit on that point again about ensuring that we're not leaving behind the folks that are in the 1-off, 2-off classifications. We'll be tasking the committee when it forms with identifying likely some appropriate number of class studies to set aside for those folks. Like Zeb mentioned in bargaining, we had talked about when the county was at, we'll do 25 of these. SEMA proposed, okay, 25, any number, and 10 1-off, 2-off for a total of 35. The county came back and said 30 period, which gives us more flexibility, but something in that ballpark is likely what we're going to want to look at. Part of the reason that we want to continue to prioritize that as well is ESA has the current practice and goal of homogenizing more classifications, getting more folks into the big program manager series, management analyst series, ASO, et cetera. They want fewer classifications. So continuing that process of identifying small classifications that themselves can be rolled into something bigger will then mean it's easier to prioritize, and we get even more benefit down the road for doing a study of these large classifications.
Just one more thing to add. So SEMA created a classifications at SEC SEMA, which is an email distribution group. The email address is on the chat. If you have issues with classifications that you'd like at some point to be considered, please go ahead and submit to that email address and the union will receive that information.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And I think that the last piece of prioritization that we didn't hit yet is that particularly for this first year that we go through, we're also going to want to be identifying issues that were created as a result of this contract. And that's speaking largely to if there was an underlying differential or realignment that, for example, an SEIU classification got, and we weren't able to do anything to address that realignment or differential for our SEMA folks, we're going to be looking to prioritize those folks to continue to clean those issues up, but 2, that in and of itself is also a strong piece of evidence that will help us realize a greater benefit for that member. That's one of the types of things that we're able to point to ESA to help justify some movement if there's become significant compaction or closing of a wage gap there between like a supervisor and line staff position.
Absolutely. Thank you for posting that, Dolores. I just saw another question come in. If the reclass ends up with a new position, does the probation start over? Yes, it does. So you are subject to an additional probationary period, assuming you reached
Underlying status.
Permanency in permanency in your prior class, it would be typically 6 months. There are a few classifications that have longer than 6 months. So let me just say it this way. The normal probationary rules apply, and that means that you would undergo a new probationary period.
There's kind of 2 situations in my experience this can apply. One is if, for example, I was a business systems analyst or something, but they've decided that I'm actually an IT manager, right? Something where there's a significant change in duties and your underlying previous classification still exists. If you were found to not meet the probation for that position, you would move back to your previous position, which is what always happens if you don't meet a probationary period with the county and you already have that underlying permanent status. What's more confusing is a situation where you've stayed in place, we've abolished your old classification because we got rid of it. And this is something we'll see, for example, with our healthcare program managers. With an abolishment of a classification, it raises the question like, well, where do I go then if you decide I don't meet it? My duties haven't actually changed. I'm not taking on anything new. You just decided that I'm appropriately called something else. In circumstances like that, as part of the meet and confer process, SEMA can argue to get a waiver that there is not going to be a new probationary period. And if we weren't able to do that, we'd have a valid argument to say, look, practically this doesn't have much effect because the person's remaining in place doing the duties they've always done. You're just calling it something else and there's nowhere to send them back to. So it's a bit of a nuanced question. Yes, you'd serve a probationary period. There are circumstances where we try to address that and get it waived, and we have a reasonable argument to do so.
Absolutely. Okay, Adam, do you want to handle the next section or two?
Yeah.
And just to address a question that I saw coming in, I'm posting the newly updated SEMA web article. So you can't, there's a PDF that at least I've been able to download. Please confirm that it's the finalized contract, the one that was read and approved at the Board of Supervisors. It does not say draft on it any longer.
Yep. Okay. So we're looking at section 2.8, automatic check deposit. This will be a quick one. All employees hired after the effective date of this agreement shall be paid by automatic check deposit. By January 2007, all employees hired prior to the effective date of this agreement shall be paid by automatic check deposit. The only important piece to share about this is that it looks like an agreement that every time the county pays you, it will be by direct deposit automatic check. That is actually not the case. There are some exceptions here where live checks can still be cut for employees. But they're particularly niche cases that only come up a few times a year, and it would be things like a SEMA member won a back pay award or something at an arbitration. The county doesn't direct deposit you a $35,000 payment for retro pay. They'll cut a live check in those circumstances. There's also some times where payroll errors can result in a live check being cut. What this is specifically meant to cover is that your biweekly paycheck is now, as of that date, required to be direct deposit. There are some niche cases where the county will still issue live checks.
And this is not a change, just as a reminder. This has been happening for years.
Yep, unchanged language. Section 2.9, 24-hour differential for special duties. This section has had some changes. A, employees in supervisory administrative bargaining unit who are exempt from FLSA overtime are and shall continue to be expected to perform required duties without additional compensation, regardless of the number of hours worked. There may be a limited number of unique exempt positions that have been authorized in advance by the county executive or his/her designee, where an employee may be required to perform duties or to remain available to perform duties at any time over a continuous 24-hour period. No employee shall receive this differential for work in a position that has not been authorized in advance to receive this differential, or for performing duties or remaining available to perform duties for less than 24 continuous hours. No employee who is eligible for overtime pay, either under FLSA or by the terms of this MOA between the County of Santa Clara and SEMA, shall be eligible for this differential. Employees who are on an approved voluntary reduced work hour agreement shall not be eligible for this differential. SEMA may recommend positions for the county executive to consider authorizing for this differential, but the decision on eligible positions will be made solely by the county executive or his/her designee in writing. The purpose of this section is to establish a differential for employees in authorized positions who are required by writing by an executive manager to be available for 24 hours of duty. The 24 hours may or may not include the employee's regular core hours. It is the sole discretion of the county to determine the need or to assign an individual employee to these 24-hour assignments. Assignments eligible for compensation for one or more days and an employee who is assigned pursuant to this section shall receive $448 when assigned for a full pay period. Such assignments shall be solely at the discretion of the county executive or his/her designee. Employees assigned for less than a full pay period shall receive $32 for each assigned day, up to a maximum of $448 per pay period. Assignments to authorized positions may be made to one employee or rotated amongst two or more employees at the executive manager's sole discretion. Assignments are based on specific individual responsibilities and business need, and therefore duties may be added at management's discretion. Duties required while assigned to a 24-hour special assignment shall be covered by this section, shall be limited to duties within the scope of the job specification of the employee assigned. Employees assigned to a qualifying assignment on a continuous and ongoing basis shall be authorized to receive the 24-hour differential for special duties prior to commencing the assignment. Employees assigned to a qualifying assignment on an intermittent or short-term basis are excluded for this section. Okay, so we'll pause there because that was several mouthfuls, and we'll look at this section first. So the first thing to say is this is something that's going to require some interpretation and some knowledge of what's changed between this version and the previous version that SEMA had. So this section is really doing two things. You read in the section, you heard me say several times there that authorization for this remains in the discretion of the county executive, right? However, then there's this section here at the bottom that reads, again, employees assigned to a qualifying assignment on a continuing and ongoing basis shall be authorized to receive the differential. That's the new section that we've gotten there. So previous versions of this language didn't have that, and instead just had the sections that referred to it being at the discretion of the county executive. What that meant practically is that there was this approval process where you went to a particular individual in labor relations, they would review your case and would either approve you or not. What the new language institutes is that it still has to go through the approval process, but now it's got a determinative factor, which says right here, if you are assigned to a qualifying assignment on a continuous or ongoing basis, you shall be authorized. So there's no longer a question of whether or not you're going to be authorized for this. It's similar to that previous section we looked at with ESA HR determining nursing related classifications, right? They're in here as this kind of safety check to ensure that, yes, the employee actually was assigned something, it wasn't a clerical error, but there's no longer this decision point there where things are going to be held up. So while above it does say it remains the discretion of the county executive, that's true. The designee is likely going to continue to be labor relations. The benefit now is that you have to be approved for this prior to being assigned the duties. So the first question that's raising is, okay, so I've been doing this for the last year and we haven't been able to get this differential for me. What should I do now that this language is in place and I'm already doing the duties? So for anyone in that position, please reach out to myself or Zeb and let us know. Similarly with the night shift, evening shift, we're sending notice to the county. Per our language, this person needs to be getting compensated. They're already performing the duties. Please address this within 2 weeks. It's kind of the internal timeline that we're setting here. For anyone who's going to be coming into these duties down the line, what this section really is a section about being on call. It would probably be better if this was referred to as on-call pay, to be honest. I think it would clarify some things. But this is specifically trying to capture those duties. You know, for example, I'm the principal IT manager at VMC, and I'm the person on call 24 hours a day. If a technical issue comes up and there isn't someone working, that issue is escalated to me. I have a cell phone that when I'm assigned this duty, I carry around with me. It's the on-call phone, and I'm required to answer it at all times. Those are the types of things that we're capturing when we're referring to these 24-hour duties. It's, again, someone who needs to be available 24 hours. If you're in that position or you're going to be put in that position, what this says now is that you need to be approved for that prior to taking on the duties. This is, again, a section that's going to require some diligence on the part of SEMA members and on SEMA as an organization to ensure that we're following this, which means if you're being assigned these duties and you haven't already been authorized or approved for this, please reach out to your SEMA business rep, and we'll ensure that this is pushed through and approved prior to you having to take on the duties. If we have individual cases where folks aren't following this, it's one of those situations where it can weaken the language for everyone else. So we want to ensure that we're not doing that. We'll read some further sections down here, and then we'll talk about more as the section as a whole, and what else it entails. Okay. B, employees exempt from FLSA overtime eligibility may continue to be required to work beyond 40 hours in a work week with no additional compensation, except as specifically provided in this section. The county will continue to expect and may require exempt employees, whether directed in writing or not, to perform tasks outside of the employee's regular core hours without additional compensation. C, when assigned to 24-hour special duties, the employee must remain reachable by phone, email, and cannot engage in any conduct that could impair the employee's ability to perform his or her job duties, including physically returning to a work site, decision-making, or completing required job tasks. So looking at these two real quick. So section C is, right, you can't be drinking or you can't be in Seattle if you're on call. You need to be able to return to the work site, and you need to be in a sober state of mind. Again, we see this FLSA definition. That's really just whether you're hourly or salaried, and this is setting up that when you're a salaried employee, the expectation is that you work 40 hours plus or minus. That might mean that you're working 10 hours a day 1 week for implementation of a new project, and that doesn't qualify you for 24-hour pay. This is appropriately capturing those folks who are available 24/7 in that on-call status. D, employees in positions assigned to work special duties as described in this section may request not to be assigned for any reason. The executive manager shall consider the request for either temporary or permanent exemption from assignment to 24-hour duties covered by this section, but the decision to grant the request shall be within the county's sole discretion and shall not be subject to the grievance procedure. E, an employee exempt from FLSA overtime eligibility who has been assigned 24-hour duty on a continuous basis for 6 months or more may request not to be assigned 24-hour duty for a 4-month period. Approved or unpaid absences of 1 pay period or less shall not be considered a break in a continuous assignment of 24-hour duty. The employee's request must be in writing and must be provided to the employee's executive manager at least 30 calendar days before the time requested for relief from 24-hour duty. The executive manager shall grant the request when possible. If the employee's request is not the rate of compensation for 24-hour duty for that employee, shall be increased beginning with the date that the requested relief would have begun, to $48 for each assigned day, up to a maximum of $672 per pay period. And the increased rate will continue for each 24-hour pay period the employee is assigned to work until the employee has not been assigned for 24-hour duty for at least 4 consecutive pay periods. So D and E are speaking to 2 things. One, for folks who don't want to be assigned this duty, and secondarily, that there's a higher rate for employees who are assigned this status on an ongoing and continuous basis. So there's a mechanism in here for folks who aren't interested in being assigned to this 24-hour duty. You're unavailable because you work an evening job or something like that, and you'd like that to be considered because of child care or elder care responsibilities you have. You don't think that you should be required to do this. Those are issues that you can escalate to your manager if you're being requested to do 24-hour duty. But what this section is establishing is that after considering those, the county can still assign this to you regardless. Deb can chime in on this, but I've not found the county to be insistent in cases where there is some reason that an individual can't take on this duty, but this does provide that latitude for them. And again, the second section here is including that higher rate. F and G, and we'll go through these kind of quick because we have the retirement section coming up. We want to make sure that we hit that in some breadth. F, only the provisions of this section related to determinations of continuous basis of an assignment relief, 24-hour duty, or correct payment of differential pay may be grieved, and such grievances shall be in accordance with the provisions of the grievance section, and shall not be subject to arbitration or arbitration process through the MOA or any other appeals. The department shall request from ESA authorization for 24-hour differential qualifying assignments based on operational needs. Once ESA authorizes the request, the department shall at its sole discretion assign and unassign the 24-hour differential assignment to specific employees. The department shall notify payroll of specific employees who have been assigned. ESA may conduct an annual review of qualifying assignments allocated to each department and renew or modify the number of assignments allocated to a specific department. So this is a significant improvement in section G that we've had over the previous iteration of this. Previously, like with the other differentials we looked at, labor relations sat in here as kind of a bottleneck, and their workload was determinative of how quickly folks were approved, and sometimes there were very unreasonable denials when the department and the employee and SEMA are all in agreement this person is working these 24-hour duties, and for some reason the person's just not being assigned. What we did with this section is we pulled, again, the ability to make this decision up or down on an individual basis away from labor, and it's now sitting with the department, right? So ESA is still going to have the ability to authorize or not authorize individual classifications. For example, principal IT manager. Once they've made that determination a single time that, yes, it's reasonable that folks in this classification may be assigned 24-hour duties, then it's up to the individual departments who we found usually have a much better understanding and are much more reasonable on this to assign or unassign appropriately, rather than every time it rotates or a new process or a new person comes in place, you have to once again get in line for this approval process prior to being able to receive this differential. This has been a particular ongoing issue in a lot of departments, from probation to TSS over the last 5 years, that it's taken months and months to get a small number of individuals through this process and approved for what, frequently doesn't even feel like sufficient compensation for the amount of extra work that you're putting in here. This language should function significantly better. And it means that the work we put in to get through a classification once and have it approved, it means that classification will remain authorized in perpetuity. And the departments will then be able to assign or unassign the duties to individuals. Prior to that, we touched on section F. It's just a limiting ability on SEMA's ability to grieve this section. You see sections like that frequently throughout the contract, and it addresses how SEMA is able to address an issue if we think there's been a bad decision made, and this is a limit on that. Okay, so I know that was a long section and we covered a lot there. Anything else you'd like to hit on it, Zeb?
Yeah, so a couple questions have come in, and as Adam mentioned, we really need your help in this. I know that there are some people, one person comes to mind in probation, one person comes to mind at SSA, that have had a long-standing issue trying to get this on-call pay, and they've been told no. So we want to make sure that you are, one, alerting us. I'm already aware of those two cases. And that we need your help in terms of actually not doing the duties until you get that compensation. Because if you continue to take the duties and consult with us, we'll send a letter on your behalf, right? And take the flack, so you're not taking it. Hey, Zeb is advised, or my union rep has advised me that I can't do, I'll send the letter talking to your boss saying that until they're properly compensated, this is outside the job specification, so on, right? But we really need your help in not accepting the duties. It's really difficult to say, oh, I don't want to say no to my boss, I've done it, and then I'm not getting compensated for it. We need your help on that. Also, there was a great question about, has the number of days been increased to account for the full 14 in a pay period? And the answer to that is yes. So you'll see that I put in there the old on-call pay PDF, which was a side letter we negotiated mid-contract, which was a huge coup for us. But that used to account for, if you worked a full pay period, it was $320, $32 a day. Well, wait a minute, 32 times 10 is 320. The pay period has 14 days in it. How come I'm not getting paid for each day? Short answer, because it was a negotiation and that's what we could get mid-contract. In this contract, an additional negotiation occurred, and you'll see that it is now $448 per pay period, so accounting for all 14 of the days. Also, I forgot, Adam, could you zoom in? There was a request to zoom in on the text so that it would take up more of the screen.
Oh, I think I should be able to.
Thank you.
Okay.
The other issue is, so I wanted to cover that. Yes, it has been enhanced. It used to be 320, which you can see in the old agreement. It is 448 now. That's an increase of more than 28%. So that's really acknowledging the full days. That was a priority, both of the negotiations team and what we've heard from people who were on it. I see another question coming in that if on-call is not listed in the spec, yes, you can be assigned. You can request to not be assigned, but you cannot refuse it. So what I mean by that is that if the department gets payment authorized and says, hey, Zeb, I need you to be on call, whatever every other pay period, you and Adam are swapping off. And I say, no, thanks, I don't want to be on call. They can assign it to you, whether you want to be or not. To the other question that came in, if on call is listed in the job spec, will it be compensated? We are maintaining that it should be, because it historically has been. It is not spoken to in the contract. The county would be able to push back, and we'd have to argue about it and say, no, that's already built into the compensation of this spec. That's why it's called out in the job specification. And that's also something that we want to be ever vigilant about. Whenever we're looking at allegedly simple administrative job specifications, we've seen the county try to slip into these job specifications on call as needed. Hold the phone. If you're not giving us an increase in pay in exchange for that language, forget it. We're not accepting that language. So everybody should bear that in mind as well. Okay, I think we could move on to the next slide. There's one other question. SEIU gets $36 per day, 1 unit for each 8-hour period, whereas SEMA, it is per day. That's correct. It is per day. We're not in 8-hour increments. We are salaried employees. There is, in fact, even an argument for other employers, and SEMA was this way for 40 years. We simply didn't get any compensation for it at all. So this was the thin end of the wedge. We got it mid-contract cycle as a side letter that expired upon the conclusion of the contract. It's now a built-in feature of the contract with a 28% higher compensation. This is certainly not the last we've heard of on-call pay. We're going to see it enhanced in future years as well.
Looking at section 2.10, Notary Public Differential. This is a new inclusion. This is something that other units enjoyed that we were able to get this contract cycle. Effective May 4th, 2020, Notary Public Differential of $60 per biweekly pay period shall be paid to SEMA represented employees who are duly authorized notary publics and are assigned by an executive manager to perform the function of a notary public on behalf of the county. So two things in particular to share about this. The first one is that this, like the bilingual pay, requires that there be some need for you to perform this work. If you just happen to be a notary public but never need to use that function for your job, then you won't qualify for this differential. Second piece is that while this affects a small number of folks in SEMA, it is something that was enjoyed by other units, and therefore it was important for us to get this included in the contract as well. Section 2.11, Career Incentive Program. Effective May 4th, 2020, employees in the classification of supervising public defender investigator who meet the public defender investigation career incentive program requirements shall be paid a biweekly rate as follows, with a 2.55 and 7.5% differential depending on the level of the certification held. As far as I'm aware, we don't have anyone who holds that 2.5% level, the basic level. Everyone's in the intermediate or advanced. This is like the public notary section. This is something where the underlying classifications receive this differential. So on top of those classifications already being compacted, this differential being enjoyed by the underlying folks just made these classifications extremely compacted. And this was an enhancement that we were able to get this contract cycle for that group. Okay, moving down, section 2.12, lump sum payments. Effective May 4th, 2020, current employees at time of signing of the successor contract who are in SEMA represented classifications shall receive a one-time, non-PERSable lump sum contract signing bonus prorated for code status. SEMA represented employees will be categorized into 3 tiers based on their base salary, falling between the minimum and maximum amount of the tier. SEMA represented employees will receive the one-time, non-PERSable lump sum bonus based on the tier that corresponds to their hourly rate. The 3 tiers will be as follows, then we list out the 3 tiers. The one-time, non-PERSable lump sum bonus will be subject to the customary withholdings and deductions and be paid in compliance with the Public Employees Pension Reform Act of 2013. So we had some questions about this earlier that we'll try to address now. Folks that were involved through the negotiating period and coming to site meetings will know we were previously looking at something on the order of, $900, $1,000 signing bonus is what we were pushing for. Close to the end of negotiations, SEIU made it an overriding priority, is what it seems like, to get something akin to full retroactivity for their members, and they achieved something close to that, which created a space for us to get substantially more than we had previously been pushing for on this piece. we had a desire not to sign the same language that SEIU had. One, because it required it was a very high priority for them, whereas we had other goals with pension reduction. But secondarily, that based on their implementation, there's some legal questions about whether PERS may be coming after them for some money that they might be owed, and that wasn't something that we necessarily wanted to be a part of. So the frequent questions that we've had about this are, how are the rates defined or determined, and how are the levels determined? So this is supposed to capture something akin to what 19 or 20 pay periods of retroactivity for a 3% wage increase would be for each tier. The feedback we got on the flat amount we were discussing previously is that it would be fine, but something that tied a little closer to your salary would be better. So what was done is we broke the ranges for SEMA's salary into thirds, starting at the bottom and going up to the top there. And then we identified the middle point for that, and figured out what retroactivity would look like for the midpoint of that range. What that means, of course, is that some folks are being pulled up from the bottom and some folks are being pulled down from the top. On the whole, we have substantially more folks that are getting pulled up rather than pulled down, such that the overall amount of money here is a couple $1 million more than we would be owed if we were looking at just retroactivity. Secondarily, because it's this lump sum amount, we're not going to be paying PERS contributions on it. And since we'd be unable to make that PERS reduction retroactive, we'd be losing 16% off the top. This is, of course, a detriment for someone for whom this is going to be the highest year before retirement, but for everyone else, that will be a benefit there. The one exception to kind of how those rates were defined that I would share is that the amount for tier 1 was actually not calculated using the bottom rate for the lowest paid classification. Because that rate was just such an outlier compared to SEMA's other salaries, we actually used the top step for our lowest paid classification. That had the effect of increasing. What the county was pushing for was a payment of about $2,000 for that tier 1. And we specifically bargained that one up to $2,575 because about 2/3 of our folks fall in that tier 1, a little less than 2/3 fall in tier 1. So we wanted to capture a larger amount for those folks than the county was proposing. The update that we've had on this since the previous town halls that we've had, or the contracts meetings that we had, based on the bargaining context, this was supposed to be determined based off the wage that you have effective today, prior to the implementation of the first 3% wage increase, any realignments. We have a lot of folks that were falling just short of tier 2 and tier 3 because of that, who'd be pushed over if we got the 3% included. So over the last couple of weeks, after some pushing, we were able to get the county to agree to implement the raises first and then determine what tier folks fall in. Part of what that agreement means, though, is that this payment might not come out on May 4th. It may come out later in May or as late as June, but it's going to be a significantly greater benefit for a lot of our folks there.
Let me hop in real quick, Adam, if I may.
Sure.
I'd like to spend maybe 2 more minutes on this and give a full 10 minutes to the retirement.
Yeah.
I know you have that we will put up that great spreadsheet, because that I think will help clarify it rather than reading the specific language, which is pretty lengthy for the retirement. But yeah, there are a lot of questions coming in here. So what Adam has displayed right here is the biggest thing you need to know. What is your hourly rate, and what bonus does that correspond to? So there are several things. Which the questions are coming in. When's the effective date? The contract language says right there, March 4th. So it's
May
where
4th.
you are. Sorry?
May 4th. Sorry.
May 4th. I apologize. May 4th. It's where you are on May 4th. So if you work through May 4th and retire May 5th, you get this payment. Okay. It also covers, as Adam pointed out, you get the 3% wage increase. So if right now you're at $66, you make $66 an hour, then you get the 3% increase that puts you above what we can see for tier 1 at 66.68. So you'd be eligible for the tier 2 language right there. So it has nothing to do with your retirement calculations. So that has no basis here. It's just you look at what your hourly rate is on May 4th and where it corresponds after adding 3% to your salary. It also and it has to do with your earning, what it is that you are actually earning, right? So some people are asking, for example, what if I'm receiving a differential, or what if I have an hourly, I'm at max step or something? That doesn't impact it. The one nuance actually that I'll refer to the entire group is if someone is at step, let's say they're at step 3, but their classification at max step would be eligible for a higher tier, where do they fit? I would think that they would be eligible for just what they're earning.
Yeah, so the agreement we had and what the language refers to is it's based off the pay rate that you actually have. So if step 5 is in tier 2, but you're step 3 and that falls in tier 1, then you fall in tier 1. It's based off the actual salary that you're earning. So folks in different classifications that bridge the gap will receive different amounts. To let folks know, we're only about 10 minutes from time. I think we'll likely be able to spend a little more time on retirement, because I know that'll be important, but we'll move quickly to get there. And we'll be, again, for anyone who can't stay past the end time, it will be recorded and everything will be posted online. So section 2.3, realignments. Effective May 4th, 2020, the following classifications shall receive the corresponding salary realignment. Thereafter follows the list of all the realignments that we've got. So there's a couple key points to hit about this. So the first one there is that this is something that SEMA didn't come into negotiations seeking from the beginning. We've addressed this a lot in the site meetings that we've had. We want to address that more. This is where we were able to land, bargaining back and forth with the county. This is the list of realignments that we were able to capture. The way it's going to be implemented is that it will not compound with the first wage increase that you're receiving. It will be added together. So for example, if you're in a classification that's getting a 2% realignment, you're getting a 3% wage increase at the same time. So they will add the 3 plus the 2 and give you a 5% wage increase upon that May 4th signing date. They will not give you a 3% followed by a 2% and get the little bit of compounding that would be had there. So it's going to be added on and will be included. For folks that we weren't able to capture here, where there were underlying SEIU classifications that got realignments that we couldn't address, again, we'll be giving some level of prioritization with the class study process for folks that are in that situation. Okay, coming up on Article 3, retirement. Effective June 22, 1992, employees in the California Pension Retirement System, CalPERS, miscellaneous retirement system were eligible for the 2% at 55 retirement plan. The County of Santa Clara's increased PERS contribution to PERS as a result of the implementation of the 2% at 55 plan, as well as existing employer-paid employee PERS contributions, was reflected as part of the effective wages. The county will maintain the lump sum death benefit to $5,000 and will continue to implement the pre-retirement optional settlement to death benefits. So let me just hit those couple points real quick. So this beginning section up here, this second sentence is just kind of its own standalone issue addressing a specific lump sum death benefit that the county has through CalPERS. The pieces above and below that are defining who the groups are in the pension benefit, and secondarily, that there was this previous pension enhancement and who these groups are. So we'll read through this and then we'll hit that definition again for everyone to make it clearer. So effective December 17th, 2007, the county amended its contract with PERS for a 2.5% at 55 plan for miscellaneous employees. In consideration for this amendment, the county and SEMA agreed that each employee covered under this enhanced benefit plan, the employee would contribute to PERS through a payroll deduction effective December 2007, an amount equal to 2.931% of PERS reportable wages toward the employer's PERS share. The county and SEMA further agreed to eliminate all of EPMC, that employer paid minimum contribution is what that refers to. Classic miscellaneous employees shall refer to those employees who are eligible for and are placed in the 2.5 at 55 retirement tier. Classic safety employees shall refer to those employees who are eligible for and are placed in the 3% at 50 retirement tier. Public Employee Pension Reform Act miscellaneous employees shall refer to those employees who are eligible for and placed in the 2% at 62 retirement plan. Pepper safety employees shall refer to those employees who are eligible for and placed in the 2.7% at 57 retirement tier. So that's basically setting up all the definitions, and then the reductions come below. So what folks have to know is that there's four basic groups, a small exception for park folks, but there's 4 groups across 2 criteria that contribute to the pension plan, right? So we have the classic folks and the safety folks. Miscellaneous folks and safety folks. So miscellaneous, despite seeming like it would be a smaller group, miscellaneous refers to most of our members. Safety, being the rest, are folks that are in probation or in parks, and they have a different pension contribution rate and payout schema. Secondarily, there's classic and there's PEPRA. So as the section defined, PEPRA is anybody hired on or after January 1st, 2013 into a PERS reciprocal retirement plan, and classic is anyone who came in prior to that. So there's 2 different contribution schemes for those groups, as well as 2 different payouts, right? So the way it defines that here in this section is that if you are eligible for the 2.5 at 55 plan, you're part of that classic group, right? So scrolling down, we're not going to read through every particular reduction that's listed out here. This is a particular section that what SEMA wanted to have instead of this long and confusing list of reductions was simply a chart that said, you know, effective May 4th, 2020, you pay this percent. 2020, June, you pay this percent, 21, 22. The county felt it was important to kind of keep this narrative structure in place about why various amounts are being paid and when the county provided them. So I'll read the first one here, but then after that, we're going to show a chart kind of that puts this breakdown in a more digestible manner. That's going to be in kind of that SEMA recommends section. So the first section reads here: effective May 4th, 2020, classic miscellaneous employees shall receive a 3% reduction to their PERS contribution rate from 16.011 to 13.011. The employee shall pay the 13.011 PERS contribution rate. This rate is based on the following: 8% employee share, 2.931% employer share for the 2.5 at 55 enhancement of the retirement plan, and a 2.08 employer share for the self-funded wage increase. So it's a little bit of word salad. So what we're going to do is share kind of a graph that makes it a little more digestible while we talk about it. So we thus far had two criteria that we needed to know for the pension contribution, right? And that's whether you're classic or whether you're miscellaneous. The other breakdown that's important to know to understand your pension contribution is that your pension contribution is made up of 2 halves. It's made up of an employee contribution that you make and an employer contribution that you make. So confusingly, when you say employer contribution, that's not referring to the contribution that the county makes on your behalf. They do make a substantial contribution on employees' behalf, but when we talk about employer contribution, what we're referring to is a contribution that you make on behalf of the employer. So as an employee paying into this pension system, you can both pay money in on your own behalf, and you can pay a portion of what the employer is otherwise required to pay. And every union in the county pays something on both halves of that equation, right? The important distinction to understand about what it means to pay money on your own behalf or on the county's behalf comes up should you choose to pull out of PERS after leaving employment with the county. You don't want to enjoy the retirement benefit, or you don't vest. For anything that you pay on the employee side of the contribution, that's your money as far as PERS is concerned. And if you choose to leave the pension program, to leave CalPERS, you can take that money with you. However, any money that you've contributed on the employer side, that money remains with CalPERS and will be paid out as, you know, pension payments to other folks. So that money is lost. As far as what SEMA has done with the current contract, we've reduced the contribution that you're making on the employer side of the equation. That's one, legally the easier side for us to reduce. There would be questions about reducing the employee side below a certain threshold, but secondarily, it's more beneficial to members that's the number we reduce, because it means that a greater portion of that money is retrievable should you choose to leave CalPERS at some point. So what we're looking at here on the share screen is a breakdown. Coming along the heading here in blue, we're showing which group we're talking about, be it classic miscellaneous, pepper miscellaneous, safety, etc. And then coming down the T-chart here, we have the contribution on the employee side and the contribution on the employer side. And we can see these numbers reducing as the years go by over the course of the contract. So to talk through the first one here with some detail. So for our folks who are classic miscellaneous, you can see here that as of the end of the last contract, so right now still, you are paying 16.011% towards your PERS, right? A very substantial amount. That's broken down across the T-chart as an 8% contribution on the employee side of the equation and an 8.011% on the employer side of the equation. In the section that we read about this, it refers to a 2.931 percentage. So what we're showing here in this chart is why that number is still relevant. It was extremely relevant during negotiations, and it will likely continue to remain relevant for SEMA into the future as something the county cares significantly about. So that number comes from a specific pension enhancement, the 2.5 at 55 that was put in place well before my time here. How many years ago was that, Zeb, that was agreed to?
The enhancement?
Yeah.
2008, does that sound right, Dolores?
A decade ago.
More, yeah. About
so
that.
So all the unions of the county agreed to pay this additional amount, this 2.931%, in exchange for an enhancement to the pension benefit. So what we can see is that SEMA has gotten us down over this contract, and we'll see effective June of this year. We're going to continue to pay 8% on the employee side. That's the legal minimum over there per PEPRA that we need to be contributing on that side. And on the other side, we're paying 2.931 plus this little bit remainder, this 0.08%, that's kind of a hanger-on for a total of 3%. The county's perspective on this is that they're very resistant to picking up this 2.931% from the perspective that this is something that SEMA folks and all other unions agreed to pay for a specific pension enhancement, so they want us to continue to pay that amount rather than having it reduced below that 2.931. That remains something that other units are paying as well. However, in the case of a group like SEIU, right, this is something we addressed in the previous town hall, this is an identifiable piece of their pension contribution and a specific line on their checks, even though their total amount is below the legal minimum, right? But they nonetheless went up from a previous contribution rate to a higher rate that included the 2.931 and have not been reduced below that amount. So the resistance and the difficulty is having agreed to pay this amount and then getting reduced below it. Scrolling down, we have PEPRA miscellaneous on here. This is the next largest group of folks that we have and will be an increasing amount of our membership as time moves forward. So again, on the left, we have contributions made on the employee side and on the right, employer side. After we address this, I think we'll go to some questions because there's a small number of folks in safety. If we have time, we can address that. But for our PEPRA folks, up until recently, our PEPRA folks will know they were paying 6.5% on the employee side, but are now paying 6.75. The reason for that is that whereas for our classic miscellaneous, the employee portion is a defined amount set to exactly 8%, for PEPRA, It's a floating number, and it's determined by actuarial tables and the cost of the CalPERS pension. What it's defined as is 1/2 of normal cost, which means that if the cost of the pension plan goes up or down, this number can change respectively. Over a significant portion of the previous contract, folks were actually paying only 6.25% over here. It then, based on actuarial changes, went up to 6 3/4, this 6.75. Folks in PEPRA should be aware this number can continue to change over the course of the next contract. This is a floating number that may change based on how CalPERS investments do. Given the economic uncertainty, it's possible that this number will increase over the course of the contract. On the right-hand side of the contract are the contributions that PEPRA makes on the employer side. So we've gotten that down to 4.261. The difference here, of course, is that there was a 3% reduction in year 1 and then a 2.25% reduction in year 2. Unlike our classic folks who received a 3% and a 2% reduction, PEPRA received a 3% and then a 2.25% reduction. That was important for us to eat up the increase that had come over here on the employee side when it went from 6.5 to 6.75, and to ensure that members who are paying into the PEPRA half aren't paying more than folks who are paying into classic for what's effectively a worse pension benefit that's got a higher retirement age and a less beneficial payout schema. Okay. So I know, unfortunately, moving kind of quick through the retirement piece, but I think we can answer some questions. I've seen the chat flashing up here.
Sure. So absolutely. I did want to address a couple things. A commonly asked question that we get is, does the 3% reduction in pension year 1 and the 2% reduction, 2.25% if you're in PEPRA, does that persist through the entirety of the contract? Yes, it absolutely does. So you get the 3% year 1 or effective this coming pay period, right? Mm-hmm. Then a couple months later, you're going to see the additional 2% reduction. The 3% doesn't expire or anything. You keep that and then add on to it the additional reduction. So there's no like, oh, it expires and then I have to pay that back at some future time. That persists for the entirety of the agreement. The PEPRA people got a little bit more in the second year or this summer because they're paying. They simply have a worse benefit. Philip is mentioning in chat right now, PEPRA gets a worse pension benefit, but pays the exact same amount. Yes, that's absolutely true. It's something that we were really pushing hard to get. We wanted PEPRA to pay less. Actually, we wanted everyone to come down to the legal minimum. Right now, the legal minimum is less for PEPRA. Given everything, we were unable to achieve that. This is still, a greater than 23% wage increase over the 5 years of, or excuse me, increase in take-home pay over the 5 years of the contract. So it is still absolutely a priority. We want to talk about the next time we're at the bargaining table. Certainly, we don't want to talk about it right now. As you may have read, we have record numbers of unemployment and a lot, and CalPERS took a bath in terms of the collapse of the stock market recently. So it's not a good time to talk about that, but we certainly do want to revisit that. I would hope that in 5 years we'll be very well positioned on the other side of whatever this economic crisis shakes out to be. Did you want to hit some of the other specific questions there, Adam?
Yeah, sure thing. And just to add on to what Zeb was saying there, it's possible with the current contract language that PEPRA can pay less than Classic. For example, over the last 5 years, for a majority of that time period, PEPRA was paying less than Classic because the actuarial tables dictated that it was 6.25% on the employee contribution. I think given where we're at economically right now, that's unlikely, but that's just somewhat of the nature of the fact that PEPRA has this floating number attached to it that can go up and down accordingly. There was a question from Hella saying that there was discussion that it was going to be on the employee side the reductions came. If that's what you heard, that was a misstatement. There was never a consideration of making a reduction on the employee side. The contract language we read refers to EPMC. What that is an employer paid member contribution. So what that means is the county, your employer, paying a contribution on the left-hand side of this T-chart, right? On the employee side. Whereas you are allowed to pay money on the employer side, and you are currently, PEPRA dictates that the employer is not allowed to pay anything below, that brings you below the legal minimum. So there's possibly some creative ways that could be addressed if SEMA was in a position to get, you know, our contribution rate down even lower than a complete reduction on the employer side. And the employee side, it would look at, you know, a differential or something like that. But legally speaking, we can't reduce this number below 8% for Classic as far as the actual contribution rate, and we can't reduce it below 1/2 normal cost for our PEPRA folks. Secondary, just to reiterate, it is only to our benefit to reduce the employer contribution as opposed to the employee contribution. So that's the side that we want to be reducing regardless.
Okay, Lawrence, actually, I just texted you. I have, we've got a couple of hanging, or excuse me, I private chatted you. I don't know how to go. We have a couple of hanging questions. How urgently do you want us to conclude, or do you want me to run through some of the questions that I have on my notepad here?
We are at time, but I'm assuming if you can go ahead and just run through them. Anyone who's willing to stay can stay. And we'll just address it that way. That way we can also have it recorded as part of the session.
Okay, sure. So there were some questions earlier that were pertaining to the both on-call pay and the, actually it was primarily to the on-call pay, which was, I believe Joe asked this question, if you're still on. COVID-19, what about my extra routine assignments related to COVID-19? Am I eligible for on-call pay if I'm working excess hours? It's kind of a conglomeration of two issues. Excess hours do not make you eligible for on-call pay. So if I'm at work and I'm working away, and normally I would get off at 6, let's just say, and I realize that I'm working until 10, I don't get on-call pay, nor do I get the shift differential for the evening. If, however, I am assigned to work a longer evening shift during COVID-19 activations, I am eligible for the night shift differential or evening differential. Also, if for whatever reason during COVID activations, somebody says, hey, Zeb, here's the duty phone, you're now responsible for answering this for the next week, 2 week, implement even 1 day. You're responsible for answering this from now on. Yes, you would be eligible for on-call pay for that time. If you just run over on a particular day, no. If you choose to answer calls after hours, no. It has to be an assignment that is given to you, and it's very clear, pre-authorized. So we please, if that's a confusion for anybody that's been activated, we're happy to help you further with that. Another question I got several was, Lakshmi asked, as well as somebody else, can we have access to the spreadsheet and the document that we reviewed with this portion of the contract? Of course, we'll post that. We'll share it. In fact, Adam, if you could share this in chat now, that would be great.
Sure.
Or I can when I'm done chatting. Then also, I had a question related to the retirement that we were just talking about. How does my highest year how is it impacted by the peculiar timing of raises this bargaining cycle? So, for example, most people on this call, because most SEMA members are classic, you take your highest year, okay? And you average that. For most folks, your highest year is going to be your last year of employment. So you take your highest year, presumably your last year, and because of the peculiar nature of our bargaining this time, meaning on May 4th, you're going to see a 3% general wage increase. Then in June, you're going to see a 3% general wage increase. We want to, you're going to get a 6% and change increase in wages. CalPERS and your calculation is based on your average. So if you work 6 months after getting that 6%, you get 50% credit for that 6%. So let's make it round numbers. You were earning $100,000. This is a simplification. You were earning $100,000. You get a 6% raise. You're now earning $106,000. And you work half a year, 6 months after that. So you're earning $100,000 before, $106,000 after, and you only work half a year with the higher $106,000. It's going to be weighted 50-50. So just split that 106 in half. That's going to be 103,000. It's as though you were earning 103,000 for the entirety of that year. So any benefit that you get is prorated, right? If you work 10% of the year after you get a $10,000 raise, you only get a 10% credit for that $10,000. So that for those of you that are close to retirement and calculating your pension formulas, really you want to go talk to CalPERS about this. But because they'll calculate it out to the cent of what your payment is going to be every month. But as a rule of thumb, everything that I'm saying is absolutely accurate and can be used as a good rule of thumb. Good calculations. You can kind of do some back of the envelope thinking as to when you want to time your retirement. Also, just to remind everybody, our survey indicated that a significant increase of our membership retired over the last 5 years, and now greater than half of our membership is 10 plus years away from retirement. So the demographics of the unit have totally shifted from greater than 50% about to retire within 5 years to greater than 50% or 10 plus years away from retirement, which makes sense, right? If people truthfully filled out the survey last time, they would have retired, right, in the course of this last contract. So those were the hanging questions I had. Is there anything, Donna, Lawrence, Dolores, anybody who's been keeping track of the other questions that we need to address prior to signing off? Okay, well.
Sorry,
That's it.
sorry,
Go ahead,
Zeb, did I miss it, or did you get the EOC assignment question that Joe sent?
I answered her earlier
Okay.
EOC question. If she
Okay.
sent up, let me see if she's got another one. What's asking about now include weekends? Okay, so no, it's not. That would not be it. Okay, because I don't know the time frames included here, and we can talk more specifically about this, Joe, offline. But it's an important question for everybody. If you are assigned additional duties for whatever reason, you're a disaster service worker, right now you're an essential worker, you're activated for the EOC, whatever it might be. If those are outside of your normal job duties and it is ongoing, like it's going to be for several pay periods or whatever, then yes, you would be eligible for the night shift or evening shift differential. If it's a one-time thing or it works over, no, you would not be. So in this circumstance, if they're saying, guess what, for the duration of COVID-19, for this current crisis, you're going to be working, I'm making this shift up, 5 p.m. to 3 a.m. Then yes, then you would be eligible for some kind of differential. If it's just excess hours that you're working 11 or 12 hours a day, then we absolutely want to capture that. And we have a soft commitment from the county that will be compensated to you in terms of ATO. It's not a feature of any of the portions of the contract that we have talked about here today, but it has more to do with our COVID-19 updates that we've been looking at mid-contract. So I hope that clarifies that. Seeing nothing else, Lawrence, do you want to play us off with some kind of message to everybody?
Thank you, Zeb. Thank you. First of all, I do apologize, everyone, that we went over time. I knew that we had a lot to cover today. That's why I wanted to start promptly at 11 o'clock. So I do apologize we went over time. I do want to thank everyone, of course, for your engagement, your involvement, and your support. You know, we as the executive board, the negotiating team, the PD committee, and definitely our SEMA OE3 business reps, we all serve at the pleasure of you, the SEMA members, and we definitely would not have been able to achieve the success that we have without you. Lots of people to thank, so unfortunately we'll have to do that later or outside this time. But I did want to mention, if we did not get to address your questions regarding the topic today, then just make sure to email that to us and we will respond to you that way. We want to point out that this again is the first in a series of 4 town halls. Next week's will be, what did we say, would be the contract overview and details. This will include Fair Labor Standards Act, Labor Management Collaboration, Contracting Out, Strikes and Lockout, etc., as well as side letter agreements and appendices. So we hope to see you then. Again, a really big thank you to everyone, especially to Adam and to Zeb for running this meeting. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Hey, thanks, Zeb, Adam, Lawrence. Take care, you guys. Be safe.
Thank you. You too.